Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. This is a public session meeting of the Tenant Services Committee for Monday, November 25th. Ask for a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you, Marcel. All in favor? Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Okay, seeing none, then I'd like a motion to confirm the public meeting minutes of September 27th, 2024. The last meeting. Debbie, all in favor? Thank you. And
sorry, I can't move the minutes. I wasn't present.
You weren't there. Okay, I guess that's a good reason. Okay, Uba, you can do that. Marcel, thank you. Okay. Now, we have kind of a busy agenda. We have a presentation on 8, presentation on 9C and 9D. We have deputations on planned for 6A, as well as 9C, D, E, F, and G, all of number 9. We have deputations, chief operating officers reports. Okay, and that now are there any items that that leaves a couple of items. Are there any other items that members would like to hold? No? Okay.
And
Sorry?
quick question, John. I want to hold 11E or 9, the crisis transfers. Or if someone is doing a presentation.
That's 9, and that's 9, it's being held.
Okay.
That's held. Okay.
John, I have a quick question on 6A.
6A, yep. Okay, yes, so we're going to hold 6 because I'd like to hold 6 and I'd like to hold just 6, so we're holding 8. So that means that we can go ahead and approve. We can go ahead and approve 6B, 7, and 9B. Okay, so that means we're approving the Q3 Violence Reduction Program Update, approving the Q2 Operational Performance Measures, and, 7, the Commissioner of Housing Equities Work Plan. So can I have a motion to approve those items? Okay, Debbie, thank you. All in favor? Okay, so those items are dealt with. So then we come back to 6A, and we're supposed to have a deputant, Gasson Fayed. Do we have Gasson? We don't see him. I have a question on 6A. Let me just get to it. And it's in regard to information shown on page 9. And so we show our community safety activities, and we show the safety audits. So from 2022 to 2023, we have a decline in patrols, we have a decline in safety audits, and I guess my question is, could we or should we be also looking at the same time, be looking at violent incidents and other things that we track, crimes against persons, crimes against property, antisocial behavior? Can we is there some place where we track all of this together? So in other words, is there a correlation between a declining number of patrols, a declining number of safety audits, and a rise in problematic behavior? Do we track that all together on on one screen, for example?
So through the chair, we do track the numbers related to crimes against persons and violent incidents. We typically report on that through the operational performance measures. Historically, we have included it in this report, but we thought we would narrow the scope of the report given the complexity of all the data that we were sharing. But absolutely, if there's an interest in collating the two pieces, we can do that. I will turn it to our senior director, Alan Britton, to speak to whether he and his team have noticed a correlation between activities and outcomes.
Yes, good morning, Chair. In regards to the overarching numbers, we do have those numbers on page 11 of this report. It just gives the high-level numbers, doesn't break it down in detail, which we do in other reports. But there definitely is a correlation in the sense the more proactive measures we can put in place, we have seen traditionally a reduction in offenses in areas. There's been many reasons why there's been a reduction in regards to the audits. The main reason was every audit, when we do an audit, we want to make sure we can adhere to following up on the recommendations. And if we create a backlog through several audits, unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all the recommendations. So there was a period of 1 month where we did not do audits during this quarter. And the reason was for us to be able to catch up on the completion of the recommendations. The second part that...
I have no sound.
Yes, you do. You do have sound, Catherine. Please mute your microphone.
Yes, Chair. In regards to the second part, in regards to the number of proactive patrols, that is something we take very seriously, and it's a very integral part of the CSU. However, we have seen a reduction in numbers, and that's contributed to our less proactive work than we normally would like to do, and that's something we do want to increase as our numbers increase.
So are we hearing from residents that they're unhappy, or are the residents commenting that they're seeing fewer patrols?
We have not had complaints in regards to fewer patrols. We have received some very positive comments from some of the VRP sites, and in 31 Division, we received, our VRP staff recently received applause from tenants for the work they're doing there, and that was forwarded to me. I was very happy to see that. But we do, when we do community meetings, they ask for more. Tenants do ask for more foot patrol, more visibility, and it's something we strive to do. And like I said, it's something that will be back in place.
With the help of digital devices to address the well-being, safety, and gun violence. These staff-approved electronic devices can help us to address post-incident crisis support, employment and educational opportunities,
15
skills
seconds.
development. Yes, social, emotional skills, substance abuse, and youth-focused program. So why the engagement team is preventing the engagement, where's the accountability?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your deputation. Are there any questions of the deputant? Okay, no, thank you very much. All right, so I need a motion to receive the Q1 and Q2 violence reduction program update. Motion to receive. Debbie, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, next item is the report on the tenant economic opportunities secured through revitalization, and we have a presentation. That's number 8. Okay, hello. Good morning.
Morning. Morning. I think Iman was going to share.
Okay, I'm sure that's all right with the other directors. I don't see any objections. Okay, so we'll come back to number 8. And we will move on to item 9C. Yeah, because we did that. So we'll move on to item 9C, which is the refreshed tenant engagement system. And we have a deputation from Catherine Wilkinson on this. So we're at 9C now. Catherine, you're there. Good morning.
I am. Good morning, everyone. So I wanted to talk about this tenant engagement model. So while tenants weighed in on how to improve the system itself, it was staff who designed the model. And I don't believe the circle shape allows tenants to clearly see themselves within the model. It's a circle with arrows, and tenants have to figure out where they might see themselves. Changing the model design to a more visual-friendly design allows tenants to readily identify which area of the model interests them. I don't know why there's an echo. Councils, they previously met monthly. I'm guessing reducing them to 4 times a year may be based on the availability of staff. Having up to 30 tenant leaders attending meetings may be difficult to manage and not allow for meaningful participation. On the TCATs, the Tenant Community Action Tables, previously these are by invite only to elected or appointed tenant reps. In the new model, these meetings will now be open to all tenants. Participating in the engagement model is not a requirement. One important takeaway from these TCATs is that tenants are desperate to talk to staff who are decision makers to better understand the way services are provided. On the citywide committee, proposed to meet 10 times a year. It's important to know the scope of this work mirrors the work of TAC, the Tenant Advisory Committee. When TAC was initially created, it was anticipated it would transfer and transition into this citywide committee. TAC has now been made permanent by the city and is independent of the tenant engagement system. I'm not sure why we need both. There is a lot of information before you today with a robust 1-year work plan. Our communities are in limbo. I hope someone will ask when tenant elections might take place. Next steps on page 9. I want to flag that the lack of resources or tools may be preventing tenants from participating. As Toronto Housing recycles computers and laptops, we should ensure it includes a tenant engagement lens specifically to encourage and support more tenants to play a more active role in their communities by providing them with the necessary tools where tenants would not otherwise be able to participate. Implementation of the plan is subject to additional funding requested in the 25 budget. Tenant communications should be announced only after funding has been approved. May I be so bold to suggest that communications materials should also come back to and be reviewed by the Tenant Advisory Committee before rolling them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the deputant? Committee members?
Not of the deputant, but certainly of staff. Catherine raised 2
I've got
questions
I'm going to ask
I actually had.
Debbie,
John,
Debbie, I'll come back to you. I've got a question of Catherine.
so John, as chair, do you want me to, can I ask it first? We usually ask questions of staff, not of deputants.
No, we hear from the deputant, and the process is to ask the question of the deputant if there are any, and then we move to staff. So while we have...
Yes, after I speak.
Oh, Gassan, you're still here?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would like to thank, can I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
I would like to thank Catherine, and she pointed exactly the same point I was pointing, is that these tools like computers and laptops, we need it in order to facilitate the communication with the tenant. That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of the deputant? No. Okay, Catherine, I have a question of you before you sign off on this item. So you're saying that you're questioning whether or not, because of all of the structure, you're questioning, can we just put her back on, Catherine, on the screen? Okay, so Catherine, you're questioning whether or not tenants will participate in such a wide range of sort of committee opportunities?
No, that's the whole point behind refreshing this. What I'm talking about is, we already know historically it's difficult to get tenants to attend community meetings. And so setting the bar for 10 meetings is a bit of a stretch. And that's just our reality. And, you know, obviously, in order to do that, they'll have to be the community service coordinators of engagement will have to come up with some really exciting topics that will interest tenants to keep them going. Otherwise, they're going to fall apart. And so if you have no community meetings, then you can't plan a budget, you have no community funding. So we really need a contingency plan if or when that happens in our communities, because many don't participate at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to questions of staff. Debbie, you can go first, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Gassan and Catherine. The question of staff, the first question is, do we distribute laptops and other tech equipment to tenants as we refresh our, for staff?
So through the chair, historically, we have engaged with our IT department to do that. I don't think we've done that recently, but it's certainly something that we could explore. But we have done that in the past, yes.
I think that's a great idea. Of course, refurbished and cleaned, of course, and hopefully it won't be cost prohibitive. And the second question: when will elections be held for the tenant advisory?
So through the chair, just for clarification, the tenant advisory does not require elections. The elections that are being contemplated in the new model is for the system at large. So that would be for the tenant representatives that, or the new title, which we're still designing, will be elected officials from the tenant communities that will sit at the tenant councils. And so we're planning to do those elections likely in fall of 2025. We want to make sure that we have all of the mechanisms in place and we have the ability to do effective outreach and engage with all of our tenant population. So the goal is to have a formalized election process for tenants next year fall.
How are we, and I'm sure I asked this question last year, how are we keeping tenants informed of this process, Nadia, so that the majority of tenants know that this is happening and this is coming?
Thank you for the question and through the chair. So with this particular redesign, we worked with a consultant who went and met with multiple tenants from communities in their communities. That individual contributed to a lot of the content that I think I've presented previously to the board. In terms of modifying the specifics that you see in the report today, we worked with the Tenant Advisory Council. We also brought the information to our Tenant Community Action Table meetings, our TCATs. We also sent a survey to a fairly large tenant population group that we have, close to 9,000 individuals, I believe, are on the list. And so we got input that way. As we continue to move forward, we want to engage tenants in their local communities as well as through centralized mechanisms. So we are looking at posters, mail-outs, community meetings, lobby intercepts. All of those would be necessary if we plan to get more tenants involved. We're also looking at, if possible, bringing in additional resources, some staffing resources to specifically support the administration of the tenant council. So we want to ensure that what we're hearing from tenants actually gets actioned. So that is something that we're looking at as well. So I think we're optimistic that this is an opportunity to engage more tenants and engage them in the ways that they want to be engaged, which is why we've outlined a few different options for tenants.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Any of the other directors?
Yeah, I have my hand up. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, good morning, Ziva. Go ahead, please.
I just have a quick question. For the Tenant Advisory Council, is there a volunteering experience for them or opportunity, or are they getting honorariums or any form of compensation for the work that they're putting in?
So through the chair, the Tenant Advisory Committee actually does have an honorarium attached to it. So it's fairly small in terms of the amount. It's a nominal amount, but the idea is to ensure that we are supporting tenants that are participating on a monthly basis and contributing to some fairly large-scale corporate policies and other pieces of work. So the Tenant Advisory Council does come with an honorarium.
Thank you.
Marcel? Who's doing the screen here? Marcel?
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
Sorry?
I don't have any questions.
Oh, no questions. Okay, all right.
Is my hand up?
It was rumored to be up, yes. Okay,
Yeah, the computer's playing games with me, and I apologize.
right, that's okay. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions. How often will the tenant circles meet?
So through the chair, we've contemplated up to 10 times a year. We do have some communities where tenant groups are active and want to be engaged with the local staff group on a monthly basis. And so the idea was in those particular areas, we didn't want to limit it. So the tenant circles is intended to be very locally driven and supported by the local community service coordinator. So that would be the group that's meeting every month if they're interested. I think to the deputant's point around scalability, I do think there are some communities where 10 times a year would be too much. And so we'd want to work with the local community in terms of what meets their needs. But we do have communities that 10 times a year would work just fine for them. So I would say up to 10 times a year.
Okay, and then how often will the tenant councils meet?
So through the chair right now, we're contemplating minimally quarterly. So the idea is that we would engage the local management teams, particularly under the new district model. So you had your respective district manager or district supervisor there to engage on local issues. So we would like to potentially scale that up, but we're starting minimally quarterly and potentially more if we have the ability to do it well and consistently.
So is the intention that issues from the tenant circles will sort of gravitate up to the tenant councils?
So through the chair, that's part of the reason why the tenant elections are returning. We wanted to ensure that local feedback through the tenant councils was being fed up to a formalized mechanism that the regional team would oversee. So absolutely, the idea is that the elected tenant official would be able to sit on the tenant council, bring specific issues, but also represent the interests of that community at that table.
Okay, and then I don't understand what's the purpose of the community action tables? Aren't they going to be duplicating what the tenant councils do?
So through the chair, the tenant community action tables is sort of larger quarterly events where we bring other divisions in to come and seek input from tenants. We have different showcases from tenants showcasing best practices. It's also an opportunity to do cross-pollination with tenants engaged in the system, but also tenants that want to share ideas and input. And so we heard from the tenants that there was still interest in participating, maybe not in a formal sense, but be able to engage with staff and decision makers without necessarily engaging at a local level.
So this will be like a forum, or almost like a little town hall for people that want to come and discuss, and it will be a particular topic?
Yeah, so for example, last year or this year, we had a session on maintenance. And so we brought all the respective divisions and parties that were involved in the maintenance systems and programs. We worked with the tenants to help design the Closing the Loop program to provide vendor feedback. So that's something that we did at the community action table. And the interest from tenants in particular is learning from each other. So we need to map in tenants being involved in setting the agenda for those sessions, but also tenants being contributors to the content and presenting. So imagine a science fair sort of style, and you have different community groups presenting their ideas, where tenants can go and get some ideas, thoughts, share input, both to staff, but also from other tenants. And then we usually have sort of a panel discussion and a Q&A or a training session. So that's the style.
It's a big city, so let's say you do this in Scarborough. Would you then replicate it in like North York and Etobicoke and downtown, or would you do several of these of the same forum?
So through the chair, we do one per region, so East, West, and Central.
Okay.
So we typically do it quarterly. We're contemplating a minimal of 2 to 3 annually, 2 being content specific and 1 being sort of a celebratory event that we do at the end of the year. So the TCAT's coming up this year over the next couple of weeks, and it's just to celebrate the tenants that have been working with us throughout the year. So absolutely, we do it regionally.
Good. Okay, that's great. Any other questions? Seeing no other questions?
Yes, I have.
There's Councillor
Sorry,
Fletcher.
I have a
Councillor
question.
Fletcher, we thought you were going to
Thank
be
you.
here. We were looking forward to seeing you.
I think my team said I was going to be on a different meeting for.
Oh, that's
for
okay.
six,
That's
so.
all right. Go ahead. Go ahead, Paula.
Thank you. Just on, and I'm so glad the elections are back. which is great. But one of the things that I think was healthy that was determined from the selection process was you had to be a tenant in good standing. You had to have a certain, you got checked out before you could put your name forward and be selected. Will that still be part of the process?
So
It's not a self-selection to run that you be in good standing, you haven't had this, you're not under an N5, you're not this, you're not that, in order to represent tenants in the city of Toronto, in Toronto Community Housing.
So through the chair, absolutely, we do plan to have a system in place or a process in place to ensure that tenants meet certain criteria. We did have a lengthy discussion with the Tenant Advisory Committee around particularly tenants in good standing, quote unquote, related to their arrears. There was some feedback given that that might actually create a barrier for some of our tenants. So that's the only area that I think we need to finalize. But in terms of if they're actively engaged in eviction proceedings, whether they're on the lease, all of those things would be vetted before somebody's eligible to run.
If you've had an N5, if you've had a disturbance, if you've had, that's been corroborated, those kinds of things?
Absolutely, that will still be part of the process for identifying individuals to run.
I think for the board, it's important that we determine the issue around arrears. Somebody's a month in arrears. If somebody's always in arrears, that might be a different matter. That has to come back. Arrears are something that aren't just left up.
So through the chair, happy to bring the criteria back for potential tenant elected officials for contribution and.
Well, they're not elected officials, they're elected tenants.
Elected tenants, I apologize.
There's only 25 elected officials.
We haven't finalized the title because we didn't get consensus at TAC, so I'm using it interchangeably, I apologize. But yes, it won't be a tenant representative, but it would be somebody that's an elected tenant, correct?
Elected tenant representative is how they used to be called, or a tenant rep, and they were always understood to be elected. So there's language that we have. I want you to be very careful. Thank you. The other thing is for vendor feedback. This isn't on topic, but I thought that was to be in place already John, I'd like you to figure out how we can have that conversation about vendor feedback, please. Because it's so long overdue. The board asked for vendor feedback. Everybody can say how the job went, and now we're still talking about it. And that is very frustrating, I'd say, for everybody, including people who have had poor work done in their units.
Okay.
So through the chair, if I can just comment on that, we do have a closing the loop program that we've initiated with proactive engagement of tenants post-vendor intervention. So we do have a program that we're running right now. We are getting results. It is referenced in the operational performance measures in terms of what we've heard from tenants to date. Right now, it is a pilot, and we're looking to expand that. So we are deeply committed to tenants providing feedback, and the program's already in place. We're just looking to have it go out to more communities and have the appropriate resources to be able to proactively engage tenants. But absolutely, that's a priority for us.
Sorry, now that we're talking about it, a tenant came and said, why don't you give a card to everybody that has had, you go to the store and you say, how it's satisfactory, not satisfactory. It's so simple once you've had work done. Is that not the basis for it, Nadia?
So the basis for the closing the loop program is proactive phone calls to tenants to ensure that we do a short survey with them on the phone. We are exploring different avenues to actually get tenant feedback. The challenge historically has been we don't get it on a consistent basis, and so we found it most effective when we actually call the tenant. Having said that, absolutely that is an area of exploration as well as technology. So we are looking at mechanisms to send a quick text after a job is completed, so tenants could provide feedback that way. So all of that's on the table. But right now, the program we have up and running is the proactive phone calls to the tenants.
Okay, John, I'm going to ask this to be an agenda item and for you to proceed with this because I don't think we have enough pathways here. Remember, we have seniors. They don't always text. They've asked for something, and in order to get feedback, you have to do it in many different ways, not just one.
Okay.
And seniors building with everybody upset and no way to feedback because it's TCHC that does the work. I'd like that on there because I think it's one of the most important things that we can contribute and tenants can contribute here. And I know, Nadia, you don't handle facilities, but I'm just planting the flag now.
Okay, so that's.
I want to see a very robust approach, and I'm not sure we're there yet. And I don't want, this is 4 years ago that was requested. So should be pretty easy to do.
Okay, that's noted. All right. I'm sorry, we should have gone to the presentation before the questions. Do we still want to do the presentation, or we're fine? Okay. All right, so that, we need a motion to approve the refresh tenant engagement.
Bryce, get your shit together.
Motion to approve, please. Okay, moved by Marcel, all in favor, thank you very much. All right, so we will go back to 8, the 2024 report on the tenant economic opportunities secured through revitalization. And Jessica will have the presentation. Please.
Well, thank you so much. So if we can bring up thank you so much for bringing up the presentation. Morning, Chair and Directors. As I stated earlier today, I'm here to present an overview of our report on tenant economic opportunities secured through revitalization and to answer any questions on the report and the material that's being presented today. We can go straight to slide 2. Thank you. Early in TCHC's revitalization process, it was identified that creating tenant-focused economic opportunities was a vital component of the success of a revitalization project, especially when we're coming to the aspects of social and economic transformation for the communities and for the tenants that live in them. This report focuses on the revitalization jobs that have been secured via our existing developer agreements and or through TCHC contracts between 2008 and Q2 of 2004. Overall, this report is to establish an annual reporting structure that provides transparency on the revitalization goals of economic transformation, summarizes tenant engagement processes related to revitalization communities and their economic development, to summarize tenant outcomes leveraged through revitalization, to present lessons learned and gain feedback from tenant surveys, consultations with developers and employment service providers and staff, and lastly, to look to summarize key trends and benchmarks that shape our work plan for the coming years. Next slide, please. Overall, I think it's important to recognize that there are many types of jobs and opportunities that are leveraged through revitalization programs. We classify these jobs under 2 categories. One is revitalization jobs themselves, which are delivered through either the developer agreements or secured through TCHC contracts. In addition to those jobs, there's also jobs that are non-revitalization jobs. These are ones secured outside of TCHC and procured through outside of TCHC procured contracts or TCHC developer funding. There are many jobs that fall within this category, but they're not formally tracked or reported on in this report. Anecdotally to date, we believe that number is somewhere above 1,000 jobs in the projects delivered. But what we're focusing on today is the jobs secured via developer agreements and jobs secured via TCHC contracts. There are 3 key areas in which jobs have been identified under these categories. There's construction jobs, professional, administration, and technical jobs, and community-oriented and skill-building jobs. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to dig into each of those jobs in a little more detail. So what we can see is the areas of focus, which are the construction jobs and the professional administrative jobs, that there are cumulative 548 distinct tenants employed through these positions. We also have, in addition to this, the short-term skill-building jobs, which are an important component of the CED delivery, but they are really about skill-building and pathways to those really important construction jobs and professional, administrative, and technical jobs. What we know to date is that approximately $23.4 million was earned by tenants through these jobs. and 206 tenants, which is about 38% of those secured long-term employment. Historically, we know that the board has been interested in understanding who's been employed through these opportunities, and so we've also conducted voluntary surveys with 73 respondents who have benefited from these jobs positions. And we know that approximately 59% of them identified as being Black, and 95 of the respondents identified as being BIPOC. Next slide, please. So when we look at the individual categories of jobs, first just starting with those very important tenant skill building jobs, we see that although this is the category of the largest number of jobs, it is the smallest percentage of wages earned. So we can see that there are 261 community-based skill building jobs, which have employed a total of 168 tenants. And for about 126 of those tenants, this was their first job. So it's a really important pathway for tenants to move into the employment opportunities that are offered through the revitalization programs. Of the 261 jobs, this accounts for about $1 million in wages earned, or about 4% of the total wages earned through the revitalization job programs. Most of these jobs take place outside of the school year and provide employment opportunities for youth who need it most in our communities. Next slide, please. Moving to the construction jobs, 206 distinct tenants were employed through 189 construction jobs and 76 skill building short-term construction jobs for a total of 265 jobs. 94 tenants, or 46%, secured long-term employment from these positions. And these jobs account for about $10 million of the total wages earned by tenants. 40 tenants were supported to secure multiple jobs, and some were supported to secure construction jobs outside of the developer's network once the revitalization employment was concluded. Also, 53% of the jobs were less than 6 months in duration, and the length of employment tracked is aligned with the duration of work required on a revitalization site. So it's interesting, as we're tracking construction jobs, we know that the length and duration of that construction job varies because of the work that's being done on a specific site, but that doesn't mean that the process ends there. Tenants often move from those jobs to other jobs within other job sites that we no longer track. So this is really tracking that first step of job employment on our sites and through our projects, and then seeing tenants able to continue employment after that point. And then just in general, we're seeing new tenant hires over the past 10 years averaging about 16 per year. And the next slide, which is our professional, administrative, and technical employment jobs. 156 tenants were employed in 175 of these jobs. I think it's important to notice that sometimes the number of tenants and the number of jobs aren't equal, and this is because some tenants are actually benefiting with more than one job position and posting through these engagement processes. And then of those, 103 or 67% have secured long-term employment. The 10-year trend indicates that on average, about 12 jobs are secured by tenants per year. And of the 175 jobs, this accounts about 52% of the total wages earned by tenants. So if we move to the next slide about key learnings, one of the key components of preparing for this report was really outreaching to tenants and understanding their experiences through these job delivery programs. The feedback from the tenants, developers, staff, and employment services really identifies both our practices and our future directions as we continue to deliver CED over the coming years. And what we found was that to meet the varied employment tenant needs, a mix of jobs and paid training opportunities are needed in a variety of fields. The jobs that we focus on with our developer partners are often construction jobs, but we know that within our communities there are many varied interests from our tenants in the types of employment that they're looking for. And the teams do work closely with our tenants to understand what type of jobs they're interested in and how we can connect them better with those types of positions. We do hear from tenants through the survey process and just in the general public that they have concern about that their employment income will impact their housing eligibility or rental rates. So we know that there is an education piece that's required as part of our ongoing outreach to tenants to ensure that they fully understand what those potential impacts could be, but also what those benefits of the employment components are and how they marry together. We do know that tenants who have completed the job training programs and have higher, overall have a higher retention rates. And this is true both for our PAT jobs and our for construction jobs, so that we're able to confirm that the sort of smaller investment in those training programs does have a significant impact of moving people into those longer term permanent positions. And if we go to the next slide. As we move into 2025 and 2026, there's a number of key trends that we're tracking and progress measures that we're looking at. Based on labor forecasts and trends and the schedule to meet developer targets, we anticipate that there will be another 30 construction and PAT jobs facilitated through our developer partners on a year-over-year basis. So those are really key targets that we're looking to report back to the committee and the board next year, is our ability to ensure that tenants are connected to those jobs in a successful manner. In order to achieve this goal, staff will need to outreach and support tenants. Although it is expected that a large proportion of tenants will continue to have an interest in non-revitalization jobs, not just construction jobs, but also those other jobs that will be created through revitalization and through the partnerships. And we'll continue to look and work with them to make sure that their employment goals match the opportunities that are provided to them. This is reflected in a target that we've included for 2025 and 2026 is to connect tenants with 50 non-revitalization jobs per year, in addition to the 30 PAT and construction jobs that we're targeting. To help support tenants to access future jobs and training opportunities, we'll be looking to make available that tenants also have formal training opportunities in 2025 and 2026. So we'll be looking to connect another 50 tenants with those training opportunities. The progress on these targets will be reported back to TSC and the board through our ongoing annual report, which will build on the report that is in front of you today. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Very good report. Questions from directors? Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, Jennifer, I'd asked what the total value of all the construction is, and I didn't hear that. Have you got that for us today, please?
Excuse me, I just took a drink of water, apologies. Through the chair, thank you, Director. Approximately since 2008, it's about $3 billion in construction.
The value of all the construction in all of the sites.
In all revitalization sites.
In all revitalization sites. And if we were to work that, I'm sure you could do that site by site to know where the big ones are, like obviously Regent's a big one, Alex Parks is a big one, Lawrence Heights is a big one.
That is correct.
Value.
We could.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important to understand what percentage of that construction value is actually realized with employment in any way, tenant employment, which was one of the sidebars for this, which started after Regent Park didn't quite have a framework, and then it got a framework in 4 and 5. I have some other questions, but I'll let others ask first.
Okay, other directors have questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So tenants who were a part of the economic opportunities programming, so like construction, non-constructions, so say if they applied for 1 year, would they be able to reapply for a same, similar, or different position for the next year?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. Yes, tenants are matched with positions based on their skill set, so there's no limit to the number of positions, and often tenants remain employed year over year in the same position. So it really is job-driven, not opportunity-driven. So yes, many tenants have multiple opportunities for employment through these CED programs.
Okay, thank you.
Marcel?
I don't really have any questions. So it's good news and it's nice to hear it. I think that's about it. And,
Okay.
I don't know if you hear me because my computer's still acting up.
Yep. Okay.
But yeah, it's a good thing to hear. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Uba?
Thank you. I echo Marcel's sentiment. It's great to see 23 million going to tenants. And I was just wondering if these positions include like professional positions like engineers, accountants. So I think we have a lot of tenants, youth tenants or others who graduate from universities and are unemployed. So do we hire like engineers for this development?
Through the chair, just to clarify, do we hire engineers from for the work that we do or from the tenants?
Or do we hire tenants that happen to be engineers for the work?
Engineers, yeah. Of course, you hire engineers for the work.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you. I think that our partners would be very excited to hire tenants that were engineers. As I said, they match the skill set with the jobs that tenants are looking to find, as well as the jobs that are being offered. So often, if we have an engineering practice, they would hire someone who has expertise in the area that they practice in engineering. So they would post those jobs to match and look for those. So I think that would be a good match for many of our projects that have engineering associated with them.
John, if I may, it's Debbie. Jennifer, do we, as part of our agreement with developers, is part of the agreement that tenants, engineering is a good example, but things so that tenants are guaranteed a first look?
Through the chair, so maybe I'll pass this question to Director of Program Delivery, William Mendez. If you could.
Yeah, and I'm asking the question because of your comment that says that your development partners will be glad to hire someone who's an engineer as a tenant. And my question then is, do we have that understanding that if someone is qualified as a tenant, that they have first interview, that there's something that gives them a leg up by being a tenant of TCHC as part of our community economic development agreements.
Yeah, through the chair, I appreciate that. I think Will can speak in more detail to the matching of tenant opportunities with job opportunities.
Through the chair, I'd just like to clarify that I'm glad to clarify that tenants have been hired in engineering positions with engineering firms and as consultants throughout the revitalizations through different developers. And the way that has worked is sometimes there's a foreign trained professional or even an emerging tenant, a young person who's graduated school in engineering, and the developers have found job placements with the different consultants and firms that they work with. So it's a really good thing to see people who have invested in themselves either outside of Canada and even within here in Canada have secured jobs in the professional, in those professional types of jobs.
Thank you. 50% of the jobs tend to be in shorter term skills development area of the three areas that we looked at. What percentage are we seeing in PAT? And the numbers were a bit confusing, so I'm not sure because I think at one point I read that over the last 15 years, only about 300 and something people have been hired. And then I'm seeing numbers that 546 people have been hired, so I'm not sure which number belongs where. But out of all of the tenants who have been hired during this tracking period, what percentage are in PAT versus shorter term skills development and construction?
So through the chair, it's a great question. There's a lot of numbers in this report, and ultimately when we drill down to look at just the professional, administrative and technical positions as well as the construction positions, we have looked to pull out those short-term kind of skills development jobs so that they don't skew the numbers. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing them presented slightly differently throughout the report. We start with the large scale number of the total jobs, and then we look to take out those very short-term positions that are really about skills training and skills development and focused on what the total jobs are in construction and PAT. Overall, the PAT jobs represent about 25% of the total positions within this report.
And would you say anecdotally, just off the top of your head, that most of those positions are on the admin side as opposed to the technical side?
I would have to defer that question to William again to clarify.
So through the chair, the short-term skill building jobs are entry-level positions that have been created mainly by the developer in partnership with TCHC to help tenants gain additional experience so they can ladder up and get into a more formal job with an employer leveraged through the revitalization. So some of these jobs have been community oriented, meaning the placements actually within the community doing community development work, office administration, or a short-term placement. In the short-term skill building jobs within construction, for example, those have been hands-on paid job training opportunities where people get to, use tools and really get a sense of whether construction is for them. And then they're referred to a formal employment opportunity. For the technical jobs, that are in question, some of the skill building jobs have helped tenants gain access to those formal opportunities as well. But there's also job training programs that are considered paid training, such as the Moving Towards Opportunity program and others that have helped upskill tenants so that way they can secure employment with in office administration and technical types of jobs.
Will, just further to Director Douglas's question, anecdotally, are you able to speak to the breakdown of PAT jobs? Which area we're seeing more jobs being achieved?
Within professional, administrative, and technical jobs, we're seeing a mix. So within that, there are jobs that range from engineering, designing, planning, sales and marketing, office administration, customer service, etc. There's a lot of jobs packed in there. A further breakdown of how many jobs were in administrative versus technical versus professional fields can be brought in a subsequent report. I think it requires a little bit of analysis to break down the numbers and clearly define.
I'm sorry, Will, I'm not trying to give you more work. I'm just saying off the top of your head, would you say that the majority of jobs in PAT is happening at the administrative level, customer service, community development, as opposed to the professional and technical levels?
The majority of PAT jobs are taking place in the professional and technical levels as opposed to administrative. I can comment on that, yes.
Thanks, Will.
Well, that's good to hear. And one last question. What weight does the percentage offered by the developers play in who is awarded the contract?
So through the chair, that's a great question. So embedded in the developer selection process is an evaluation of a proponent's CED package. So it is actually a weighted criteria as part of the revitalization next steps when we're selecting developer partners. The weighting of that CED is developed in such a way to align with tenant priorities. So an engagement process with tenants happens before the release of the RFP. Tenant priorities are identified, and then the CED scoring is looked at in terms of how it matches the needs of that specific community. So it is embedded in the overall selection process and really an important part of that.
Okay, so but it's weighted equally across all proponents.
It's within
So
the
if tenants identified ABC and a proponent comes in with ABC and another one comes in with EFG, the ABC proponent will win, given that that matches more closely tenants' priorities. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it would be both in priorities, but also in value, in dollar value as well.
Everything else, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
so I would say there's two components to it, the total value and then the ability to match with tenant priorities.
Thank you.
All right, so just like to comment, I think it's a very good report, and the survey results are, are pretty impressive, The job helped me increase my professional confidence. Agree or strongly agree, 92%. The training or support offered through the TCHC developer helped me perform better in the job, 80%. And, throughout the survey, it's very positive. People felt that they wouldn't have got as far as they did had it not been for the support, offered through the program. Improved my personal and family financial situation. Well, I guess that's why they were concerned about, their tenancy, 86%, because it's really lifting them up. So I think it's really outstanding. So the question I would have to staff is, I mean, on the surface, it looks really good. And do you feel it could be better, or do you feel that, so I guess I don't know how well, the partners who hired these individuals felt. I presume they probably felt pretty positive about it, and that the outcomes apparently were very good. I mean, could we set the bar even higher, or do you think this is the right balance?
It's a great question. Thank you very much, Chair. So in this report, one thing that we've captured, and actually this is further to a question from Director Douglas in 2023 about matching tenants with job opportunities and what that process is and how it's structured. And we realized that to date we've had a relatively informal process. That informal process is what's summarized in this report. What we'd like to do in coming years is make it a more formal process so that we are tracking in a more we're tracking tenant job preferences and where they're looking to head, and matching them more closely and quickly with the developer opportunities. I think I can say for our team, and also for speaking on behalf of our developer partners, this is a very rewarding piece of work that we work very hard on together. But tracking our outcomes, tracking tenants and where tenants are looking to head in terms of their professional goals and aspirations is something that we'd like to do better and more purposefully in the coming years.
Great, okay, thank you.
And John, if I may, I think what would be helpful as well, Jennifer, is to then touch base. I know you do a 1 year touch base. And by the way, I absolutely agree that an annual report is best. It would be great if you can do an 18-month and 2-year touch base as well to see how for longer term employment in the field, and that people aren't going in for 1 year, losing the job, and then somebody else comes in, as we often see with these job placement programs.
Great, thank you, Debbie. Sean would like to have a word.
Thanks. I'm not finished.
Oh, sorry, quick question from Councillor Fletcher.
It's not really a question. It's just a notation that for $3 billion worth of construction work, $23 million is not really all that much. So I know we think it's big because we hear that, but that's not a lot of money. That's the first thing. I'm very happy to have this report started. You all need to know it started at City Council with their question about Regent, and there was no tracking of any jobs of any kind. So now we've started to track. But I agree with Debbie that it's not tracked in a, I'll just call it a crisp way, and you've agreed with that from the staff side, that we haven't tracked it in that way. When we look at the amount of investment and what's happening, making sure that it's not just housing that's being renewed, but every opportunity to be able to advance people and give them something better in their lives is something that I think our board has always wanted to do, including internal hiring for different positions, which actually, as we learned, there wasn't hiring from TCHC tenants for a number of years internally for our own jobs when we're looking for that. So this report, I'm pretty sure, will be going as part of community economic development report that's going to be going to City Council and going through Community Economic Development Committee that's chaired by Councillor Bravo. And that's one of the thrusts that she's working on, to make sure we're getting the most out of everything. So while I'm very happy that we're tracking, it's too bad that it's not as, I'll just call it, crisp and deep as it could be in knowing what's going on. So the number of jobs where somebody has now in full-time in a trade that started in construction, I don't see that. And I know we're tracking people, but there are jobs to do that. I don't know who our partners are. We do have different models. We've had different models with every development where it's a negotiation for what percentage of construction, what other kinds of jobs. The PAT jobs, those are great now to have on the construction because people are getting real life experience when they're doing professional work rather than just building. What's the tracking on that? And it's great to hear people thought that was good, but I did hear it was 77 people that came back to us on a survey. So this is just a beginning, and we need to go deeper, farther, better, and make sure that the processes that we're using are good for the community. So just let you know that this is probably going to be tomorrow at Community Economic Development. It'll find its way into all those conversations, and I think it'll make it much richer and much better because that's where it started. We're doing all this work. Let's make sure that people that don't have access get access through public money, because that's what's building all of these things. Our dollars, developer dollars, they couldn't build anywhere if it wasn't for our land. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Ziva, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so I did have a question, a follow-up question. So I would like to know, this is just out of curiosity, how many tenants applied versus how many, obviously we have the stats of how many people that we employed. And then the people who didn't receive employment through these programs, what are supports that TCHC is giving to them to make them a little bit more successful the next time they do apply for any of these positions?
Thank you, Director. That's a great question. So I'm just going to point everybody to attachment 4 of the report, which has engaging and supporting tenants, and it's the process outlined. I don't believe, and I'll look to William as to confirm for me, we don't track the number of people who apply for positions, but we do track the number of tenants that are looking for work. And that's a really key component, and also tracking what type of work they are looking for. So the outreach and promotion is part of that, understanding that there are job opportunities that are coming, to have tenants identify what their interests and goals are for employment, and then to help them identify what pathways best put them along the path to achieve employment in their areas of interest. That moves tenants either into direct employment opportunities, if there are existing opportunities that exist, or into potential what we call pathway positions or short-term training positions that allow tenants to be set up for success, to be able to apply for those jobs that they're interested in once they come available. I'll just turn to Will to see if there's anything he would like to add to that point, but I think ultimately it is about self-identification of tenants, what they're interested in, and then matching them either with training or with jobs that match those interests.
Through the chair, future reporting will be able to better account for the number of tenants who have requested support or have demonstrated interest in seeking employment and the outcomes related to that. In general, if a tenant does not secure an employment opportunity, the developer, TCHC, and local agencies or employment service providers will still continue to support the tenant to access training and job opportunities so they could achieve their economic goal. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, can I jump in here, please? Because I think it looks like we're out recruiting everybody. We have partners that have large numbers of folks that are interested in the trades. They have PAT people. These are, unless I'm wrong, Will, and you're out individually recruiting everybody, we have partners that are coming, the developers are using, we're using, and the partners are bringing people forward. And they're TCHC tenants, there's outreach for TCHC tenants. If we're not doing that, because that's not our area of expertise. So I think we're going to dig into this just a little bit more, saying we're going to do this later, we're going to do this later. Regent Park started in, I don't know, 2005, that it probably 2006. So we've got a lot of experience under our belt. We do have partners. We've changed our model. What's our model? How to go deeper. We've got lots of development that's coming along. And just in general for tenant hiring, what's our model? And how can we make sure we don't get in trouble with our model and that we do the best for tenants with our model? So I think everybody on this committee is very interested in every tenant that can be successful, being successful, tenants that have historically not had access to jobs, get access to jobs because we have special pathways that we're ensuring are set up through development and other means. And that's a good thing.
Okay, it's all right.
Thanks.
We'll turn it over to the CEO, Sean.
Thanks very much. And through the chair, I just wanted to add that, this is an important program as we look at tenant economic development through our revitalization program. And thanks to Jessica and the team for bringing this forward. I do want to add, though, that we're working on a broader look, right? So what are all of the different areas of need that we have out there? We know that there are opportunities through the investments that we make to provide economic and employment opportunities for tenants. And there's a variety of ways that happens today, right? There is the revitalization program, as we just heard about, although also heard that there's room to grow, and certainly I would agree with that. There are direct employment opportunities that we provide for tenants. And then I'd also point out that we spend over $500 million a year in various ways with various vendors. And so we're looking at all of those right now to say, what are the ways in which we can use our economic power to provide opportunities for tenants within our communities? I think we've talked about this a lot in the past, but what I'd like to do is wrap it all up together and bring it back to this committee and potentially to the city as well to show how that power can be better harnessed to support our tenants going forward. I think the revitalization program is great, but it's really just a drop in the bucket of what we're capable of doing if we look at all the ways in which we spend our money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'd just like a motion to receive this report, please. Moved by Debbie, all in favor? Thank you. Thanks again, Jessica.
And Sean, I just wanted to say, good to hear you speaking like this. It would be great to see equity vendor policy in place, and you might want to take a look at the one the city has had for the last 10, 12 years or so as well.
Okay, moving on to the next item is tenant funds for common areas, item 9D, and we have a deputant, and it's Catherine Wilkinson. Okay, Catherine.
Of course you do.
Of course we do.
Good morning again. So I just want to point out that, tenants did actually agree to combine the tenant action funds and the former participatory budgeting funding program to create one funding program, but in doing so, that it would also provide additional funding. So under the existing Tenant Action Fund program, tenants could submit an application up to $1,000 for each community initiative once a month. All communities had access to funding for events and activities, and many continue to thrive throughout the year. Some communities may have submitted multiple requests, where others submitted none at all. I'm not sure that a per bedroom funding allocation is necessarily the only way or an equitable way to distribute funds, as size should not be the only consideration. There are any number of issues communities may be facing throughout the year. For privacy reasons, I kind of have mixed feelings about tenants being responsible to get other tenants to sign attendance sheets. This is typically a staff function. And requiring tenants to take photographs at community events could actually prevent legal challenges for Toronto Housing later on, unless there's written permission from the individual tenants, or in the case of parents where underage children are participating. The current vendor list is broken. Vendor payments are delayed, resulting in vendors dropping off the list. For example, Canadian Tire uses a third party for deliveries, resulting in a $250 delivery fee per delivery. So that could be something such as a garden hose. So we only have 2 Canadian Tire stores on the vendor list. And if your item is sold out at the store staff use, well, your community simply does not get the item. Ideally, we should scrap the vendor system, because clearly we are not getting value for money by using vendors specifically for tenant engagement. The proposed $860,000 is about the same amount as the existing Tenant Action Fund program, but no additional monies have been added from the former participatory budget program, which was somewhere in, like $5 million or something like that. Based on the proposed distribution method, it may have an unanticipated negative impact on tenant engagement in smaller communities that are currently thriving, as they will now have less funds available to them. We must also keep in mind that taxes and delivery fees will be deducted from all funding requests, so the community does not receive the actual amount they requested. The Tenant Services Committee is not aware of how the tenant action funds were distributed and for what purpose. Under the new model, what happens to unallocated funding when a community chooses not to participate? Communities were better served under the Tenant Action Fund funding model, where they could request up to $1,000 per initiative throughout the year, as opposed to the new model that requires all buildings to determine their needs at the beginning of the year based on the number of the bedrooms in their building. The proposed model, to my mind, is more restrictive, claws back funding previously available, and does not allow flexibility based on issues or needs arising in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the deputant?
Yes, I just have that. So buying the flowers, doing all the things that tenants would want for a fund, because first of all, the participatory budgeting was for capital dollars to do capital works, and then it went to do anything. It changed. Would you agree with that? It went to buy a barbecue. It went to buy a popcorn machine. It went to buy things for the building. That's what I've seen in my investigations have shown me that.
Yeah.
You agree with that? So it went from fixing something up like a minor capital, getting something built, to buying something for the building.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't participatory budgeting, it was purchasing, correct?
Yes.
And now the funds that might go for the Christmas dinner, the barbecue, are they captured here or are they in a different place?
No, they're captured here, but you have to know, as in the new, at the start of the year, everything you want based within your funding envelope, and you have to prepare for it at the beginning of the year.
So you're thinking that if you want to have a barbecue in September, that you can't go to the meeting in May and say we're having a barbecue in September.
No.
It has to be early. So I will ask about, I happen to agree with you that this whole program has been a problem for a while. So I'm going to ask about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the deputant? I can't see the screen. There we go, okay. All right, no further questions, Catherine. All right, so we have a staff presentation on this.
I don't have a question.
If you don't have a question of the deputant, we're going to go to the staff presentation? Okay.
So thank you, Chair. So this report provides information on the work TCHC has done during its review of the former tenant funding program to ensure it aligns with the needs and expectations of tenants and stakeholders. The review focused on consulting with key stakeholders to ensure their perspectives and concerns were considered in the program design and proposed funding program. And a proposed funding program has been developed to support the enhanced tenant engagement system model. Since the onset of the review, TCHC staff ensured that the process involved extensive consultation, involving a meeting with the Tenant Advisory Council in May 2024, and continued engagements with tenants and other stakeholders throughout the summer. Updates on progress were shared with TAC for input, along with the tenant staff working group. The new program will support tenants engaging in the building and townhouse community level by providing them with the necessary resources to enhance the well-being of their communities and support the purchasing of equipment and hosting of events and activities. To provide more detailed insights into this work, the tenant engagement team has prepared a short presentation on its review of the tenant funding programs and the creation of the LIFT program. I'll turn it over to Christine Ina, the Acting Manager of Tenant Engagement, to walk us through the presentation.
Good morning, Chair and Directors. So today's presentation on TCHC's proposed tenant funding program LIFT is a result of TCHC's review of the former participatory budgeting program. As part of our research, design, and implementation phase, we continue to listen, collaborate, and refine the proposed program through input from tenants, frontline staff, management, as well as external stakeholders. So the slide that's currently shown really speaks to some of the history that's already been shared by both the deputant as well as is listed in our more formal report that we've submitted. So the way participatory budgeting started at TCHC was really focused on tenant participation as part of the capital projects. It's evolved significantly over the years, and the timeline shown really tells the tale of what participatory budgeting was before it was put on hold. So there was a couple times throughout the actual program itself that the program was put on hold, at times due to the complexity actually of the program itself, and others due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2022, TCHC extended the pause for us to do actually a comprehensive review aimed at enhancing service delivery, ensuring accountability, and also aligning the program with the corporation's or operational structure at the time. Next slide, please. So what we've done this year, and when I speak of the we, I speak of our centralized team in collaboration with the regional teams, but also with the tenants that have shown up to actually consult, engage, and collaborate with us. So starting in the spring, our process involved extensive cross consultation. We had tenant engagement at the heart of the redesign of this process. We've had over 900 touch points achieved through surveys, focus groups, meetings, as well as the actual program renaming initiative, which landed us with the program LIFT, which actually stands for a local initiative funding for tenants, or in short, LIFT. Next slide, please. So what we heard from tenants, specifically through the survey, as well as through the focus groups, really shaped the principles of what they wanted the future program to be. So really a program grounded in accountability, fairness, inclusivity, simplicity, it being tenant-led as well as transparent. And the simplicity piece really speaks to that the design of it be straightforward and simple and free from the unnecessary complexity that we have had in previous programs as well. Next slide, please. So what are some of the changes that we're actually looking to do as part of LIFT. So one of them has already been mentioned by the deputant, and that's really combining our current Tenant Action Funds program with the former participatory budgeting program into a one singular program for tenants to use funding for. So again, speaking to that principle of simplicity. The other thing which was alluded to was the new funding allocation model. So funding allocation model based on the number of bedrooms within a building or townhouse community to determine how much funding a building would get. And that is what they would use at the start of the year to determine what their priorities are and how much money they would allocate towards those. And that speaks to the third bullet on here, which is really the annual planning process with tenants, which is really meant to be participatory budgeting in action in a new way. So the tenants will know at the start of the year how much money their building is allocated. They would come together as part of the tenant circles we spoke about as part of the proposed new engagement model, Engage Together, and they would define what their priorities are. And I know there was a discussion whether they need to determine all of their priorities at the beginning of the year, which is not necessarily the case, but they're going to be bound by the number of dollars they can assign, which will be told to them at the beginning of the year. The annual planning meetings was really something that the tenants preferred over the current process where an independent roundtable decides how much funding is allocated or whether an application is either approved or denied. So they want the ability for a larger group of tenants that live within that building or townhouse community to come together and collaboratively decide what their priorities are and how they want to spend their buildings or townhouse communities funding. Next slide, please. So the report itself goes into more detail about the steps, but really what it looks like is that there is, in step one, the tenant engagement and budgeting activity that happens. And this is where the proposed program really stays true to the principles of participatory budgeting as it places the decision-making power directly in the hands of the tenants. So again, tenants will come together in this step as part of their building or townhouse community tenant circles to define what their community development priorities are for the year. They're going to engage actively in the budgeting process and decide how the funds will be allocated. And this approach really empowers tenants to lead and shape the use of their program dollars and drive the overall community development benefits. And this was something that really was strongly brought forth through the survey we did, the focus groups, and also through our continued engagement with the tenant staff working group that supports us in designing this program. And the second step is really more procedural in terms of plan confirmation. This is just to ensure that the plans that are developed align with the program's criteria, to ensure that the funding requests are in scope. And tenants, of course, are always welcome to revise and resubmit if something is found to be out of scope. The third step is something that I think a lot of us are familiar with, which is the ordering of goods and services. There has been concerns raised with tenants about the vendor process, including through an earlier deputation by Mr. Gassan himself as well, in terms of us being able to deliver timely and compliant procurement of goods and services. We are looking at some alternative options apart from our vendor management process at the moment to see how we can expedite the purchasing of goods and making sure they get to tenants in terms of their event or in terms of the equipment in a more timely fashion. And we're really continuing to work towards this as part of the program launch. And we meet continually with our strategic procurement and finance teams as well to ensure that we can develop something that's going to be aligned with the risk and financial components, but also ensures that tenants get their items in a timely fashion. The fourth step is really the receipt of the goods, where the tenants will either be receiving the goods or executing the events, including the barbecues, or have their community gardens in place. And this is really where we're looking for tenants to lead. Tenants have told us in some of our buildings that they're capable to do this on our own. Again, in other buildings where tenants will need support, our engagement CSCs will assist them with ensuring the event or the program goes off as planned. And then in the final step, which is step number 5, is really about the impact assessment and community reporting. We heard again loud and clear from tenants through multiple touch points the importance of closing the loop and ensuring that all tenants within the building know how the dollars were used and also what the impact of their efforts were. Tenants really saw this as a step as more just than celebrating their successes, but also highlighting the need to evaluate the process, identifying areas of improvement for future years, and planning also for future initiatives that they may want to host in their buildings. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation.
Question.
Councillor Fletcher.
I'm still quite glad we're coming back, circling. I want to be very careful about using the words participatory budgeting because that is for budget and big dollars. It's not for the barbecue. And that is traditionally what it means. It started out like that. It got changed. So I'm just flagging that. It's taken a long time to try to get that stamped out, but it's still there. Are these for capital dollars, capital initiatives in a community? Is it for goods and services? Is it for programming for tenant activities? Which one are we talking about, or all three?
So through the chair, it is not for capital investment in our communities. It is for local goods and services as well as smaller programs. So there are instances where a tenant may want to run a small after-school program or something to that effect, and that would be eligible here, as well as purchasing smaller items for their community, but not capital.
So traditionally, participatory budgeting is a budget matter where you're aligning capital dollars to a project. So would you not agree with me that this is not the same? It's not that kind of a budget.
So through the chair, absolutely agree. I think we're moving away from any sort of formalized participatory budgeting program, and hearing from the tenants, they wanted the ability to actually choose how they spent their money locally. And so we've combined the two initiatives to allow them to do that. But this is no longer a participatory budgeting program formally or informally.
Yes, I did hear that a few times in the presentation. So I just want to be very clear, formally or informally. Buying a barbecue that a group of tenants want to buy is not deciding to get capital dollars for some major repair in the building. So, and what is the cost per bedroom? What's your plan on how much is it per bedroom to look at what tenants are going to be getting in their communities?
So through the chair, we are still finalizing the amount and allocation we'll be getting to the 2025 budgeting process in communication with the city. So we don't have a final amount, but we're looking at a proportional representation to ensure that there's equitable distribution of the funds. So I'm not able to comment on the specific dollar amount at this stage.
Fine, you don't have the number, but we'll get that at the board prior to you making a decision to proceed, correct? Or it'll be in our budget submission.
Correct. There is a budget allocation associated with this program, yes.
So what is it now then, please? You have a budget. Budget isn't just new. You've got it. What's your amount and how much per?
So at the moment, our Tenant Action Fund program for 2024 is budgeted at $250,000.
And what's that per bedroom then? What's that compared to last year to have a barbecue or to have different things in the community? $650K?
So what we're hoping to do as part of the budget case we submitted to the City of Toronto is increase our ask back to $860,000, which would be...
Okay, this is a little confusing, folks, because either it is $860 and that's per bedroom, or it's $250. What's that per bedroom? So this isn't quite,
so just
for my mind.
So yeah, so to clarify through the chair, the $250,000 is what we're currently funded at for the 2024 budget cycle for tenant action funds. Again, as part of our business case submission to the City of Toronto, we're asking for a funding increase to go back up to $860,000. So we're hoping next year to launch LIFT with $860,000.
So $860,000 was the tenants buying things fund, not the PB fund. It was $800,000. Could I hear, please, maybe the CFO is here. That money was put on hold. So there's been a lot of savings over the last number of years. And why isn't that back in at 860 and $250,000 isn't, I'm interested in how that works out across all the tenants. We're into it now for money. What happened to the money that was assigned in the budget line last year and the year before?
Through the chair, thanks, Councillor Fletcher, for that question. Last year, 2023 and 2024, the PB program were put on hold.
Please don't call it the PB program.
Sorry, the Tenants for Common Area program was put on hold. So as a result, we did not receive any funding from the city.
Since the investigation, how many years?
Maybe Nadia can chime in on that.
So through the chair, I think the program's been on hold for at least 3 years, potentially 3.5 years at this point.
So I guess the question that the councillor is asking is, was that money just absorbed into sort of like general expenditures and it went for other purposes?
So through the chair, at the time of the restructuring, the former common area tenant fund, dollars were reallocated to the regional teams to support local engagement as well as local initiatives. So the funds were absorbed within the regions.
So the funds were spent regionally?
By tenants. They were used by tenants for tenant activity through the regions, correct?
So through the chair, the funds were redistributed to the engagement teams, the community safety and support pillar, intended to support tenant events, tenant funds, and so it was used for engagement activities in the regions.
So are those gone now, or is this to replace the tenant activities in the regions?
So through the chair, the intention is for this to be a supplemental tenant-driven fund. We continue to have engagement dollars that the staff are able to support and supplement tenant activities.
So what's the budget line for that? The same as last year?
So through the chair, yes, and those would be reflected in the local budgets per each region.
So I'm unclear then, if we have that base funding, which is for the barbecues, tell me what that would fund. Barbecues, gardens, get-togethers.
So through the chair, the local engagement dollars funds anything from local activities based on the ones you've described. Sometimes it's we're doing a community art showcase of a local tenant engagement project, so we contribute funds to work with the tenants. It also supports our community action table events and any other sort of local initiatives that the local team drives. Like, for example, we're doing a get to know your district management model. So we're bringing tenants together and providing a meal and engaging them, bringing in facilitators training. So those would be the kind of things that the local dollars cover at this point.
But there's tenants like a bingo night, tenants are having a Thanksgiving dinner. Where's that from? The Tenant Engagement Fund through the staff?
So currently, we support those activities through the CSCs and the regional teams. The intention of this new fund is to allow tenants to self-direct and actually identify activities that we may not, through our channels, be supporting. So this would be supplemental in nature.
So there's, I'm just looking at all the baskets here. There's the $800,000 that's there, which is staff, but the tenants are coming to the staff saying, every September we have a barbecue, we're having it again. So that $500 would go there. Am I right about that?
So through the chair, we're going to be using the priority setting process to work with the tenants to identify what they want to do throughout the year. We continue to have tenant engagement funds that allow staff to do activities that are either tenant requested or sometimes working with partners. And so the idea is there will be an opportunity for tenants to choose how they want to spend their funds, and there will still be additional
funds?
The funds in the LIFT program. So the intention is for the $860,000 to be distributed to the tenant communities and supported by the tenants in terms of determining how they want to spend those funds. We continue to have some tenant engagement dollars in the regions that allow staff to continue to provide partnership activities and work with tenants. So this is supposed to be intended to be tenant-driven while we continue to have some dollars to support staff-driven activities.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher, I have other directors that would like to ask questions.
Yeah,
I'm happy to come back to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
John,
Yes, thank you very much.
John, just one clarifying question.
Sorry, I've got Marcel first, to Debbie, then I'll come back to you, okay? Marcel?
It was a follow-up to the last question
Well,
that was just asked.
You can, I'm just going to go, Marcel's been waiting, so I'm just going to go to Marcel, okay?
I can wait for Debbie. That's fine.
Okay, Debbie. Go ahead, Debbie.
Thank you, Marcel. I just wanted to clarify, Nadia, the budget, the hopefully budgeted $860,000, that's for 25-26. Will it be allocated per building, regardless of what the bedroom cost is, which is something that you will come back to us for? I'm just trying to see if priorities is being set at the building level or local level. Folks must know what their allocation is so that they can prioritize. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's the intention. We're waiting on budget confirmation, and then we will be communicating that with the respective communities.
Okay, so to be clear, there's not a centralized priority setting exercise that LIFT is. It's actually a local priority setting exercise.
So through the chair, absolutely. Yes. It's intended to be locally driven at the community circle level, so either at the building or townhouse community level, absolutely.
Thank you. I have another question, but I'll wait my turn.
Okay, okay, Marcel, you're up, please.
Thank you. Okay, I am totally confused with this. I'm a little confused for a couple of things. One, I'm not entirely sure or confident that money hasn't been taken away from the communities for this new process. And they're like where I live, like in my area, in my building, there's a number of townhouses that I've tried to get clarification on as to what, are they part of it or not part of this community. I'm also worried about the vendors, the way things get ordered, because a lot of times I don't get what I've ordered properly. And not only do I not get what I want, sometimes I get things that, like we got a hose last year, and I don't want to sound picky or petty, but I turned the hose on and the thing exploded, right? And it was like a $12 hose or something when we wanted something that was durable. And I'm just like, I'm really, really worried that the money that's supposed to be for the communities is being reduced. And if you reduce those dollars for the community, then you're reducing the ability for the community to actually do things that are actually going to bind the community and get buy-in for community development, right? And the vendors, like, it's not very well. They're not very well at all. Yeah, so I'm just totally confused. I don't know what's what or who's who, or I'm maybe it's just me, but I'm totally confused.
So through the chair, maybe I can address some of your questions / concerns, Director Charlebois. So in terms of the allocation at a building and community level, we have different communities that identify slightly differently. We do have some townhouse communities that don't see themselves as partnering with the respective building, and we do have other communities where they're seen as one community. And so it would be decided at the community level whether you're pooling the resources with the townhouse community, for example. So we do have instances where that is the case, and in your particular area, if that's the case, then the money would be pooled as such. The intention of this is to actually expand the amount of dollars being able to be tenant-driven. So right now we have $250,000 for the Tenant Action Fund. The hope is to expand it to $860,000, and so the anticipation is there will be additional resources for the community. So it shouldn't be less resources. There are some communities that have potentially applied for more Tenant Action Fund funds than other communities. But what we heard from some of the quieter communities or communities that didn't necessarily participate, they felt that it wasn't always equitable for them. And so they wanted to ensure that they had an allocation and allowed them to spend it accordingly. I did hear from you and the deputant that there's interest in looking at what we do with additional funds. So if there's a community who wants to do projects beyond their allocated amount, so they're not limited, that's something I will absolutely take back with the team. We want to ensure that we're not limiting engagement, we're expanding it. So that's critically important. And I believe there was a third point, Director Charlebois, that I wasn't able to touch on. Oh, vendors, absolutely. So we are continuing to work with finance to ensure we have different distribution mechanisms so that you get the products that you need. We heard loud and clear from the Tenant Advisory Committee as well as from tenants that our current system of distributing funds on these types of programs isn't super effective all of the time. And so we want to make sure that we are providing different mechanisms for tenants to access funds, either through the frontline staff or through other mechanisms. So we continue to work on that, but we do recognize the current model isn't working, and so that will be amended before we implement this program.
Thank you. And just one thing too, another thing is that when we do put in an order through whatever catalog, Canadian Tire, whatever, that if we do it in May, it's really important to get that order in May, not June or July, but that same month, because that you're ordering something that's going to be current, not later on, right? That would be really, really helpful. Thank you. Still confused, but thank you.
Through the chair, absolutely. We want to ensure that they're timely deliveries, which is in part why we wanted to set out sort of your annual plan so that we could work to ensure that we had all of the necessary products and tools and resources for tenants. And we were planning accordingly in terms of our processing and procurement and ordering. So absolutely, I agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Marcel. Debbie, you had another question? No?
I did, and it went right out of my head.
Okay, well, I've got a question. I've got a question of the COO. If, let's say, a building is allocated $1,800 or $1,500, and they're only using $1,200, so they're not using the full budget, will the unused balance carry over to the next year?
So through the chair, we did have discussions with the Tenant Advisory Committee. There will be certain locations that have more requests than funds allocated. And so we're working to finalize a distribution model that will allow for the funds to be used within the year at a respective community. So we're finalizing that. So for example, if you have $1,200, you use $1,000, but there's another community who wanted to do an additional activity that's costed out that isn't part of their allocation. We're working to finalize how we would be able to distribute any additional funds in an equitable way.
So I was thinking if I'm in a building and I've got a project that's going to be $2,000, but I'm only given $1,500, I might want to wait to the next year to be able to realize that, because if I'm only having $1,500 this year, I'm only going to get $1,525 next year, and if I just spend what I always have, I'm never going to be able to afford it. And so, but if they could bank it and essentially save the funds for something that they want to get, then first of all, they don't have to spend everything that they have on something they don't want. They could save the funds for what they do want. I don't know if that's doable or feasible, but they certainly wouldn't want those funds to be reallocated to another building down the road, for example.
So through the chair, I don't know, Lily, if you wanted to comment on being able to move funds forward into the following year, but it's something happy to explore if it's possible.
So they would basically be banking it.
Definitely, through the chair and to the chair, we will be looking into process to allow that to happen. There are other considerations with the city as well. Normally for the surplus, we probably have to work with the city to look at whether to return the surplus or reinvest into our communities. But we will take it away and report back.
Okay, thank you. So you've got, there is commentary on page 8 which says the aim of the policy review is to address limitations brought forth by tenants and TCH staff, which include that the current approved vendor list is too restrictive, resulting in higher costs and fewer options for necessary items.
Like, I could see a group of tenants getting, Marcel got a $12 hose that didn't work, and, meanwhile, somebody could have just gone off to Home Depot and bought the $50 hose that was good. I mean, I don't know if when I read this, it sounds, well, it's coming from bureaucrats, it sounds very bureaucratic, and yet I don't know how you put in a system that's not bureaucratic, it still has the necessary checks and balances in so people aren't ripping it off. So how do you allocate the money so that it's spent wisely and carefully and simply, so that somebody can just drive up to Walmart or Home Depot or something like that?
So thank you for the question, and to you, Chair. We currently have a tenant funds distribution policy that was approved by BIFAC and subsequently the board. I believe it was introduced about 3 years ago. We recognize that that policy is restrictive and limiting to tenants, and so we're working with finance to update said policy to do just that. We want to make sure that it's accessible for tenants, but it also maintains a healthy risk balance so that we are ensuring that we are getting the appropriate receipting and getting the appropriate paperwork subsequent to that. So that's what we're working on with finance to strike a healthy balance and bring that back to either BIFAC or Tenant Services Committee for approval. So that policy hasn't been, the updated policy hasn't been finalized.
And so I think it was Marcel made reference to there was 2 Canadian Tires on the vendor list. Is that, I don't know if that, so is that possible that there's like 2 stores as opposed to like the Canadian Tire chain? Is it on a vendor list? I don't know if anybody here actually knows the answer to that question. I mean, we have a vendor list that identifies specific stores rather than whole chains?
We are currently looking into that, Chair Campbell. So we'll be looking, it's part of a much bigger, smaller vendor program, and also to tie that back to the social procurement as well.
So, I mean, the suggestion would be if there's going to be $800,000 spent, my suggestion would be that you approach one vendor's regional head office and say, hey, listen, we have this money to spend. Would you like to be the preferred vendor? And can we get, 10% off all of our purchases or something like that? So it's whether it's Home Depot or Canadian Tire or Walmart, I guess it would depend, but I don't know, like a preferred vendor list of local retailers.
Absolutely, we're looking into those. We also have another avenue like Amazon online ordering, which we have it's a vendor record through a buying group arrangement.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments from directors?
Yeah, I think that we should decide if Amazon vending is something the board would approve of in mass buying from Amazon. That's number one, rather than local vendors, where I know some of our tenants happen to work. So for me, that's a problem. Thanks for letting us know that. Sean, I'd like you to take that into account, please. That's a decision to go online purchasing rather than in Toronto purchasing, number one. These are small vendings. Our capital project is $1.34 billion with a lot of millions and millions in purchasing. This is $250K. So I do have a few questions, like what kind of project, John Campbell mentioned, $2,000. What project would you envision in the $250,000K project, the lift project, that would get $2,000?
So through the chair, I'll start and I'll ask Christine to comment. So currently the $250,000 is allocated to our tenant action funds, and that's funds we're actively distributing through the application process. So we can speak to a couple of examples there. For the expanded fund, we are looking to expand the budget, as mentioned, to $860,000. So Christine, if you can give some examples of...
I'm asking, let's be clear, and I'm sorry I'm not right there. There is a fund currently at $800,000 that tenants can get money for the barbecue, for the Thanksgiving dinner, for this and that through the staff. Am I right?
It's not a fund, it's dollars allocated.
Okay, there's dollars, there's an allocation, 800.
It varies region to region. It's anywhere between $200,000 to $250,000 per region.
No, what's in the budget? 800? What's the overall amount that's in the budget that's that kind of allocation?
It varies at a regional level between 200 to 250,000, depending on the region, east, west, or central. So I don't have the exact total number.
Okay, so it's 600 to $750,000. That one, that's established, not moving, not changing. It's in the TCHC 2025 budget that's being requested. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's a different one. Now you're proposing a new one for 250,000 K, right? Which is your lift.
No,
That's tenant directed.
No, we currently have a tenant action fund of $250,000. We're proposing an expanded program called LIFT, which would be inclusive of the 250 to the tune of 860 to allow more tenant-directed funding.
Okay, so this is maybe I'm the only one that's so confused. Although Marcel, you said you were confused. So, where's Marcel's hose getting purchased from? Which fund?
So through the chair, to clarify, it will be one fund that allows for tenants to engage to actually make purchases. So if they wanted to work with their local community service coordinator and do a local activity, the funds within the region are enabling tools to allow the frontline staff to engage with our tenants and to work with partners.
No, where was Marcel's hose bought from? Which fund bought your hose?
So through the chair, I'm assuming it was a tenant action fund, but I can't speak to the specifics. He's nodding, so.
And that fund was, I think that we just need to be clearer here because we're not all on the ground. Just run them by me again. You're asking here for us to approve an extra, whatever that is, difference?
No, what we're asking to approve is the model for.
600.
The model for distributing the funds. We are not asking for budget approval. That's through a separate process. And so what we're asking the Tenant Service Committee to approve is the model.
Look, let's just get to the money because this is going to be a hard budget. Currently, how much is there per region that isn't part of the Tenant Action Fund? 200 to 250K per region.
Approximately, yes.
That's for activities. No hoses were purchased from those.
No, so the Tenant Action Fund covers specific requests from tenants through the application process to the tune of 250,000.
And there has been no Tenant Action Fund, or there is a Tenant Action Fund?
There is currently a Tenant Action Fund in place to the tune of $250,000.
Per region.
So you have a
in
Tenant
total.
Action Fund for 250, and you're suggesting here to have a lift that would go to 800K. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, so through the chair, we're proposing to bring back the tenant funds for common area work that was done previously to actually expand a version of the tenant action funds to ensure that there's more activity happening locally driven by tenants, yes.
Sorry, the common area work, what would that be? What would
The
that
previous program, known as participatory budgeting that was put on hold, we are looking to bring back a model closer to bringing activities and products to tenants through this expanded fund. So we looked at some of the items that were purchased through that 800,000 allocation 3 years ago, and what we heard from tenants is there was interest to expand the ability to do different things in their communities, and 250,000 across 3 regions didn't go very far, and so the ask is to have a larger fund that will allow for more tenant-driven activity, not separate from the Tenant Action Fund. So initially, we were contemplating and working with the tenants that we would have bring back a version of the previous PB or what another form of that. And what we heard from the tenants is they wanted a combined fund. They didn't want confusion around whether it's a tenant action fund or whether it's a project for the tenant fund, this tenant fund. And so we've combined it into the new lift with a request for additional funding to restore some of the dollars that were associated with the previous PB program, the 800,000. So the combined amount and ask will be for 860. If we're not given the additional allocation, we still have the original 250, which was in this year's budget, going into 2025.
So Marcel's hose will be there along with Capital Works for the common area.
No.
Through the chair, again, this doesn't contemplate capital work. We will continue to do the capital.
Minor capital.
Furniture. As
Oh.
an example.
Yeah, sorry. In terms of furniture and smaller items, that is still available through the Tenant Action Fund. If this is approved, we will have expanded resources to continue to do that, and we'll be able to work with the tenants proactively at the beginning of the year to set out their annual priorities.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to have this conversation. If I have to go somewhere at noon, but if I'm around for the private session, I'd like to move some of this to conversation into confidential, please. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from members? No? All right, so motion to approve, please. Moved by Debbie, all in favor? Okay, all in favor, thank you.
I'm just not sure what I'm approving, John, that's all.
We approved the models, the design of the process.
Not the extra money.
No, there's no
But
money.
the extra
involved.
design counts
No,
on the
no.
extra money because
This is not about,
every
this is
time
not
we
about
talk
budget.
about it,
Yeah,
that's
this is
the
not-
first part of the budget. So I'm not still unclear about the process, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next item is the item 9E, the priority transfer policy update. And we have a deputation. Oh, who do we have Kathy Birch and we have Catherine Wilkinson. Okay, Catherine, you go first, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good conversation you just had. I look forward to how you hammer that out offline. Look, when we're talking about the transfer policy, look, I know a lot of work has gone into the report before you in the effort to combine the three categories within the transfer policy to establish this newly created critical needs category. And for the most part, I'm okay and I'm in support of the recommendations. But that said, let's talk about what is missing. If we're going to review a tenant-facing policy, it should be viewed in its entirety, not cherry-picking categories within the policy. The current tenant transfer policy includes additional transfer categories. These are primarily managed by the centralized wait list at Access Housing, and the only people who know that is staff themselves. The three categories not being discussed or the special priority program, and that's for survivors of domestic abuse and human trafficking. The overhouse transfers, which is actually handled both internally by Toronto Community Housing, if the unit's small, too small by 1 bedroom, and then all other overhouse households go through the centralized wait list with the access to housing staff at the city. And then the non-priority transfers, or as tenants call them, general transfers, they're also managed externally on the centralized wait list. So we're doing a great disservice to tenants. While no one is talking about these categories, they didn't just disappear. Some transfer categories are handled internally by Toronto Community Housing, or externally by the City of Toronto, or in some cases by both. It is confusing for tenants to figure out who does what. This information is not in the current policy. So 12 years later, the tenant transfer policy was reviewed in 2018 due to an ombudsman's investigation to create the crisis priority category. As a landlord, we have an obligation to inform tenants about all transfer categories, how they are managed, and by whom. It seems only fitting that we would do that within a tenant transfer policy. to be clear, only the crisis and accommodation categories were mentioned during the human rights tenant consultations. At no time did we have a conversation about revising the tenant transfer policy itself. Now, 6 years later, in 2024, we are reviewing some categories again in the policy due to an ombudsman's investigation into the human rights policy. So as per the shareholders' direction, tenants should be consulted in the revision of this important tenant-facing policy before it is brought back to Tenant Services Committee or the board for approval. Information regarding tenant transfers is not well known or understood by tenants. This policy in its entirety should be reviewed and revised to ensure tenants are aware of the process before they are in need of a transfer. We can do better by our tenants, and they deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Uba.
It's not a question, it's just a comment, John. I agree with Catherine. The priority is very complex and very confusing sometimes, and I think we need, we need to educate people about it so they can make an informed decision. So my question is, if I can ask this to the staff, is there any way that we can?
We'll come back to questions for staff. We have another deputant, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, so Kathy Birch, good morning.
Good morning, thank you. After reviewing this report, I have to advise you on behalf of the RPATH committee that we have concerns about the implied consultations specifically on tenant transfers. During the human rights consultations, we did discuss the priority of accessibility. However, and we need to be clear about that, we did not discuss or have in-depth conversations specifically on transfers. We want you to know that those conversations, at least at RPATH, still need to happen before any draft of a transfer policy comes anywhere near this committee or any other committee or the board. This report speaks to procedures. This policy, like the accessibility policy that we are currently working on to update in 2025, needs to have the procedures and processes as an attachment to the policy for transparency and consistency in how it is applied. It is necessary to provide this attachment so that it doesn't become clickbait for tenants and staff to go here, there, and everywhere just in order to be able to follow the rules and find out what applies. The reason is many times tenants take situations to their TSCs and will be told it's not in the policy, so it doesn't meet policy requirements. When often the critical information is in the procedures and the processes, because the policies are overarching and then the dirty deeds are in the details. Right now, those items are not published for tenants and to have access to. And that brings up the mentality of staff for us to know and you to find out. That's not quality of service. This way of thinking does not provide transparency, provide tenants to know what they need to bring forward so that their requests can be successful and manage their own expectations. This will make it less frustrating for everybody involved. This policy, like all policy, needs to be accessible in the following ways. It needs to meet accessibility, communication standards of plain language, and that the documents read at approximately a grade 6 to 8 level. This means exactly what it's called, plain language, not simplified. Some staff have been using the term simplified, and that implies that the audience reading the document is less than, which is not true and is actually offensive. That's not in the operations staff, but it is being used nonetheless. The standard calls for plain language, and it should be called exactly that. We have many tenants where English isn't their first language, and that brings me to the second communication standard, and that being available in multiple languages. And whether you're in a board meeting, a committee meeting, you'll hear Debbie often ask, is it going to be available in multiple languages? And that is part of accessibility communication standards. And I will say that the communication team does do a very good job at making sure that all the posters and documents that tenants can get the information in any language they need. They just need to ask for it. This policy and procedure needs to be very specific about defining timelines when someone needs to go to the centralized wait list versus being on a TCHC wait list as an example. The topic of extended wait times is because this corporation is not transparent enough with tenants. They don't tell them that we don't have any 3-bedroom units right now, and it could be a long wait because it only makes up 4% of the units to begin with, as an example. And please don't take that percentage. I just pulled it out of the air to provide the example to you.
20 seconds, Kathy.
Yep, I'm asking the committee to direct management to have the in-depth consultation with RPATH and any other tenants that have not had those in-depth conversations specifically on transparency before it ever comes back to this committee again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Okay. All right. Seeing none. Thank you, Kathy.
John.
Yes.
John, sorry, Debbie. I just have one question. Kathy, are there 1 or 2 priorities off the top of your head that RPATH may have about the crisis transfers?
There are some real concerns because it's not clear and there's no place where tenants can grab a hold of the documentation and know where their rights are, what's going on. Like, is this process working right? Has something been missed? They're always left in the dark, and I need some place for all of these processes and that to attach the policies, because our staff don't even know. Sometimes as you talk to one TSC versus another TSC in a different region, it could be applied very differently, and that's why we need this stuff as attachments to the policy. The policy is overarching, and I understand that, but we need to get with the details that make the decisions transparent to tenants, and it's not there right now, and we need the transparency and the consistency, and the only way to do it is attach it to the policy.
So clear communications. Good. Thank you.
Any other questions of the deputant? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Kathy. And questions of staff on the report? Yes, Uba, please.
Thank you. And we sure need the plain language and the multiple language. My question is to the staff is, can we do educational sessions so people can understand the complexity of these priority, what are the difference, what to do, all of it. And when I was reading the report, I just want to say this, thank you so much for Nadia and your team and the whole staff. I can see you put a lot of work to it, reaching out to different stakeholders, tenants, making sure it's all inclusive. And couple of things that I noticed is it's something that came up before, and I was asking, other people was asking, is if we can have the support letters from CSCs, and we can expand that to, getting support letters from CSCs, from CSUs, and other community organizations, because oftentimes what happens is if we're relying on only support letters from the police, sometimes the police don't give support letters to some families if they refuse to go and test in a court. And we know we all know there are a million reasons why people don't come forward to be a witness, consequences and others, right? So if we can expand who can provide the letters, that would be, I think, in my opinion, that will increase the chance of our tenants getting the fulsome support. The other thing that I noticed is, just want to mention, is if we can merge the two transfer, the SPP transfer with the crisis transfer. We all know people, when they apply to access to housing, and if someone is facing abuse or human traffic, they get the first priority. And again, TCHC cannot do all this alone. The city might help, province, I don't know who else can help, as well as to provide some units, to hold some units for crisis transfer and medical transfer, because TCHC, again, can only offer what they have. We don't have enough units. We are holding units for revitalization. I think we should do the same for this case. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
So through the chair, thank you for the comments and the question. Absolutely, your first question around the educational campaigns and working with tenants, as well as our frontline staff to ensure they have the updated information is part of the plan. The report before you is just to outline an update in terms of where we are with the process. Originally, we were hoping to come back to Tenant Services Committee in November with the updated policy, but we recognized that we needed to engage multiple stakeholders, particularly tenants, including RPATH, so we are committed to doing that. So a lot of the comments made by both deputants will be part of the process moving forward before we bring it back to TSC, ideally in April. Many of the comments you did make, Director Farah, are contemplated in the new updated policy, and so we'll continue to engage with you to get any other direct input. Lindsay, I don't know if you wanted to comment specifically on the last comment about the SPP.
Yes, absolutely. And I just also want to touch on the question and comment from the director about support letters. That is definitely something we have been hearing really strongly in the consultations, that we need to expand the kinds of documentation that we look at and take a holistic approach to reviewing the full package of documentation. And that would certainly include support letters from a variety of places, internal TCHC staff and CSU specifically. I will speak to the concept of holding units, specifically for crisis transfer and the critical needs, the proposed critical needs category. That is something that we will be discussing with the Housing Secretariat, some of that we require their go-ahead, but they have indicated an openness to it so far. And same with the SPP category is governed by provincial legislation. So certainly we have and will continue to talk with the city about how critical needs transfers are prioritized within the grand scheme of priorities for transfers and units within the whole portfolio. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Marcel, you have a question?
Yeah. Do you know how soon you would be meeting with Ms. Birch and RPATH regarding some of the concerns she had with the language in the policy? And I had another one, but it totally lost. It's gone. But yeah, it basically, when do you foresee having more conversations with RPATH regarding this?
So through the chair, we'll certainly circle back with Ms. Birch and the RPATH committee to set something up, if not before the end of the year, certainly early into next year. We are committed to ensuring we get plain language correct. We're also committed to having it in multiple languages as well. So many of the comments that were raised is something that's top of mind for us, but we'll continue to work with Ms. Birch and the RPATH committee to make sure we get it right. We will also be including the procedures. I know that's something that Ms. Birch also raised in terms of ensuring that the policy has the accompanying documents and procedures. That will be part of the approval process for TSC, bringing it back to this committee, but it is something that we can have on the website as well. So we're listening and we'll continue to engage with RPAC moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Fletcher?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Before, can we just be really clear about the role of the service manager and transfers and everything else? That currently there's a list and that's in with the service manager. Maybe, because I'm not always sure the board understands that there's an oversight by the service manager. It's not this housing secretary
led by TCHC, but we've been lockstep with the service manager through this process. And we want to make sure that it's clear both to the committee, but also to tenants, what role we play versus the role the service manager plays. But you're right, they do play a significant role in oversight.
And how we get new categories added to the list, and that you can be on a list, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that category can be there. But there are some that are immediate and others that are not immediate. Would you like to address that?
So through the chair, yes. I think there's certain priorities that both from a provincial regulation perspective, but also for the service manager have deemed a priority. So we have a system to keep those in place. I think what we were looking at through this policy is the administration of the categories that TCHC takes carriage over and whether we're optimizing those. And I think we've heard loud and clear that we haven't been and that it's too restrictive. And so that's the area of jurisdiction that this updated policy will look at. But based on the comments today and what we've heard from others, it's important to educate the tenants in all of the categories, which the updated policy will reference, and continue to work with the service manager.
Thank you.
And I just have oh, sorry, Debbie. Debbie, you've got Debbie's got her hand up. Good. Go ahead, Debbie.
Thank you, John. Two questions, actually a comment and a question. Very glad to hear to Uba's suggestion in terms of expanding where letters of support are coming from, especially given the concern around expecting it from police. I guess it's a comment more than a question. I'm hoping that it will be understood to mean that the police does not necessarily need to be asked for a letter of support or a letter of reference in this case, and that does not then have a negative impact on how the request is decided because there is no police reference. My second question, one of the things that UBA has been raising over the many years that we've been talking about this is that there seems to be limited, and we all understand that we have much more demand than supply in terms of affordable housing. UBA has suggested over the years that we look at combining various transfer processes as a way to opening up opportunities for placement in things like co-ops, scattered housing, and other parts of the housing ecosystem that TCHC is not necessarily in control of. How feasible is that?
So through the chair, that's what we're currently engaging the Housing Secretariat on to determine what it looks like. Other housing providers don't necessarily have a lot of stock either, and so it does open up some possibility. I think we will have better luck, for lack of a better term, on actually holding units. So I think that was one of Director Farah's suggestions, and we are actively looking into that. So following a similar model to our relocation units, where when we get units, we're not necessarily waiting for the specific cases. We hold the unit to ensure that we have multi-bedroom units in different locations. So that is something we're exploring, but we're exploring both with the Housing Secretariat at this time.
Very good. Looking forward to hearing the outcome of that conversation.
So I have a question. Do we have a definition, or is it just an understanding of what's a crisis priority transfer?
Through the chair, we do have a definition, and it's outlined in the current process. So yes, we do have a definition.
And is it generally speaking, somebody looking to flee a potential violent situation?
Correct. I think the complexity, and we've heard this loud and clear from tenants and Director Farah and others, is that it requires police verification of said issue. And so what we've done in the interim, recognizing the policy is significantly restrictive, particularly to racialized communities, we have already started accepting non-police verification of concerns. So we're already putting that in place to ensure that we're not barring tenants from accessing a transfer. So really it's the verification process that I think has been really restrictive, and that's what we're looking to update in the updated policy.
Right, because somebody who hasn't maybe had to call in the police it doesn't necessarily mean that there hasn't been violence in a spousal situation, I suppose.
And through the chair, part of the reason why we need to verify is because there are instances where individuals are requesting a transfer for a variety of reasons, and we want to ensure that we are prioritizing individuals that are truly experiencing a crisis. But again, we recognize that there's other ways to verify that and support the tenant, so that's what we're looking at.
And there's a line here, the key feedback from tenant consultations included priority and accommodation transfers should be open to all tenants, including market and affordable tenants, not just RGI. But
So through the chair, we've heard feedback from our market tenants and tenants that are under the affordable rental status, that they're also interested in being supported through the process. There is fluidity between the RGI and the market band, a lot more so than, like, typically someone might think, okay, a market rent tenant came in as a market rent tenant, not necessarily. So we do have RGI tenants that go to market status, and we do have market tenants that go to RGI status. And so there was interest in ensuring that there was fluidity and they could access the system across the board, and that's something that we'll be looking at.
so if you've got two situations, do we prioritize the RGI tenant situation?
Not necessarily. Through the chair, it'll depend on the specific circumstances of those specific cases, and we look at each case on its own merits.
Yes, you'd have to do that, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so could we have a motion to receive the report? Moved by Uba, all in favor? Okay, thank you. Okay, very, very important, important work. Okay, next we have the administration of the Tenant Advisory Committee. And we have Catherine Wilkinson to make a deputation.
Hello again. It's been great spending the morning with everyone. So first I want to disclose I am a member of the Tenant Action Advisory Committee. It is a privilege to serve on this committee. We are a diverse group of tenants from across the city who bring our own lived experiences and perspectives to the group. We continue to learn from each other and the staff that support us. On page 2, the terms of reference. It actually took 3 meetings to create a terms of reference for the Tenant Advisory Committee. By now, Toronto Community Housing should have in place a standard template for terms of reference for tenant consultations, presented to a new group and only edited where necessary to provide information specific to the topic at hand. The mandate and objectives are determined by Toronto Community Housing, and the values and code of conduct are embedded in the tenant charter. We should not have to recreate all of this every time we create a new tenant group. We had multiple debates around quorum. A standard terms of reference should follow Toronto Community Housing Board and Committee governance practice, where quorum is 50% of members plus 1. Straightforward and nothing to debate. As you see from the report before you, TAC has been very busy during its first term, and members are proud of their accomplishments. Unfortunately, TAC is shrouded in a cloud of secrecy. While topics and materials are referred to TAC, the general tenant population is kept in the dark about what they are working on. All materials are considered confidential, and members may not speak about them publicly. The COO is a designated spokesperson for TAC. On page 3, listed are the tenant engagement items TAC has worked on, and as earlier mentioned, aside from the engagement model, none of these materials have been made public. So this feeds into the secrecy surrounding TAC agendas, that everything is confidential even though the feedback from this group of tenants at TAC will affect all tenants in Toronto Community Housing. So going forward, we need to consider how we can be more transparent about TAC's work plan, and more importantly, when items will be made available to the public. On page 4, TAC also participated in other corporate initiatives, such as the CSU review, the KPMG strategic plan review, and more recently, tenant insurance. On page 5, the future vision for the TAC. As I mentioned earlier, it was planned that TAC would be transitioned into the citywide level of the tenant engagement system. The scope of work is the same for both of these groups, but now that the City of Toronto has made TAC a permanent group, independent of the tenant engagement system, I'm really not sure we still need both of these committees at the city level. Tenants joined TAC because they wanted to ensure there was a more inclusive approach to tenant engagement, and management determined the TAC agenda items. It is understood corporate initiatives also come through TAC, and they are time sensitive and come up at any given time and take up an entire meeting, which impedes our ability to actually focus on tenant engagement items. When revising the terms of reference, we need to consider where public tenant consultations are held on corporate initiatives, if it is still necessary, to also bring them to TAC. I support extending the current term to allow TAC to monitor implementation of the recommendations they have made to date. Thank you for the opportunity to participate and your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the deputant? Okay, none. Okay, thank you. Any questions of staff on the item? No? No comments, no questions. All right, motion to receive the report, please. Marcel? Moved by Marcel, all in favor? Okay, thank you. And the last item is the tenant complaints update. Do we have Veronica Harvey?
Hello, yes, it's Veronica Herring.
Hello. Good afternoon. Good morning.
Good afternoon. Yes. Okay, I'm wanting to talk to you about, there's a lot of violence going on in the west end of the city, gun violence. And a lot of the tenants are very concerned about the violence because before the COVID, we never had a police car or security car coming to the building. Now they're coming early for the liking of the tenants. We also have vagrants sleeping in our stairwells, and which leads to, things that tenants could be sexually assaulted or worse. They also break into people's units that aren't home, and they take over their units. We don't know if these people have mental health issues or not. We want the security to come around and see who is sleeping in our stairwells, our garbage rooms, our laundry rooms, our washrooms, and our recreational room. They could come around 11 and the staff can open it at 7 when they come. There was even a public laundromat who closed his doors for the same reason. The superintendent needs to check who is on the lease and if they're really living there. A lot of people have more people in their units. For example, one tenant who has her son living in her unit, when he's approached, they tell him he's taking care of his mother, and caregivers shouldn't be living in Toronto housing anyway. They should be living nearby, or most of them come from outside.
So Veronica, hello, Veronica, if I could just interject. So the report that we're reading is a tenant complaints update. Do you have are you commenting on the tenant's complaints process?
I'm talking about what's happening in our community right now that tenants want dealt with, because it's a real problem. It's this building's been such a sweet building and it's really nice, and we don't want to see it disappear.
Right. Okay. Because
have all these problems.
Okay. So it's not really. I appreciate the concern. It's not It might have been more appropriate for you to speak on, for example, the violence reduction program update earlier, because we're dealing with the complaints update, people making complaints, and the reasons for making complaints. If you have,
Well, a lot of people don't make complaints because nobody responds to it.
Okay.
The security rarely comes around now, and then when they do come around, they give you a hard time, and they say they're following the police. They don't have time. They don't have enough staff.
Okay, so carry on. Staff indicates that they'd be happy to speak to you after you're finished.
Well, I'm just basically stating that we have a real issue with this problem because we need some solutions and we need some policies that in place. Like, for example, visitors staying overnight. They should only stay a week because you know what? When you travel, you have to pay for a hotel room. Why shouldn't they be paying rent after they stay more than a week? Because a lot of them don't leave. They stick around and they stay in the unit and they live free. That's not fair to the rest of us. That's what we have a problem with, and this is what a lot of people are upset about. And they're supposed to come and do a meeting here last week, and that never happened. And that came from security.
Okay.
So, that's all I got to say.
Okay, thank you for calling in. I'm going to just put the Chief Operating Officer on to offer a reply.
So through the chair, thank you. And thank you, Veronica, for your deputation. We take this really seriously and I appreciate you coming today. I will ensure that staff follows up with you to understand the specific concerns you have and we'll address it. So we will reach out to you in the next day or two.
Does that sound good, Veronica?
Okay.
Okay, thanks for calling. Okay, so motion to receive the report, please. Marcel? Moved by Marcel. All in favor? Debbie? All right. And Uba, are you still there? I don't know if we have quorum. Uba, are you still there? There we are. Okay. All right. So that concludes the public portion of the agenda. I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Debbie, all in favor? All right, and we'll take just 5 minutes, and then we'll come back for the in-camera session.